What is good, my friends? John Papa here, and today we're doing some trade recaps. Last Thursday I made nearly $3,000 with just a few plays. Now this was 3 completely different setups, and in this video I'm going to break down all of those trades so you can see my thought process, why I entered, where I exited. Now before we get into the charts, let me give you a quick overview of the 3 trades that I took. The first trade was on the ticker CAN, and this one was an overextended gap down, and I traded it to the short side. The next trade was on the ticker GNPX, and this one I traded to the long side. This was a multi-day breakout. And the final trade was on the ticker UOMO. Now this one was a classic OTC pump and dump. I traded it to the short side, and I had actually been swinging it for about a week before I covered my position on Thursday. And so between those 3 trades, I made $2,755 profit. And none of my positions were really that big. I had fairly decent percent gains on each of these trades. And these trades were 3 completely different setups, but this kind of encompasses the main setups I'm looking for when I'm looking for an A+ trade. So without further ado, let's get into the charts. So first up, let's take a look at the ticker CAN. Now this was the overextended gap down setup that I traded, getting into this trade during pre-market and then covering it up fairly early in the day. So this is the daily chart of CAN. And you can see on last Wednesday, this had this massive move from about $4.40 all the way up to like $8.70. Nearly 100% gain in a single day. And I don't believe that there was any news on this stock. And so that was what really got me interested in this play. You know, the stock was up almost 100% in a very short amount of time and just on no news, so I really didn't expect it to keep running. So let's get into an intraday chart. We'll take a look at a 1-minute chart on this stock. So first, this was last Wednesday, so this was the day before the day that I played it. You can just see this huge move that it made. With almost no pullbacks, it was pretty much just uptrending into the afternoon, and where it finally started consolidating sideways. I was watching it kind of after the close this day. I believe it closed up here around 8:04. That was kind of the top in after hours. It was gapping down a little bit, almost down to the 750s, and then kind of staying in a channel between 750 and 8. So I definitely wanted to target this one for an overextended gap down play the next morning. And so coming into pre-market, you can see that it gapped down even more in pre-market down below that 750 level that was kind of holding that support during the previous after hours. Now that level is kind of becoming resistance in the early pre-market times. I mean, it's trading between about 725 and 750, and so I actually shorted it fairly early. This is about 7:30 Eastern time, which is about 5:30 a.m. Mountain time where I live, and it was bouncing here a little bit, and it had this little pop up over 750. And so I went ahead and I shorted, I believe, 300 shares right here at 759, and that was a pretty decent entry considering that the rest of pre-market, it never made it back up to those highs. But I didn't go in full size because I was risking off of this 804 level. The previous day's close was my initial risk. But so I got my first 300 shares on, and then it pulled back down, and it actually broke down below kind of that 725 level that had been supporting so far in pre-market. And from there, for the rest of pre-market, it was consolidating kind of between about $7 and $7.20. And then coming into the open, let's just go ahead and get this. So this is the start of pre-market here on the left of the chart. And you can see that right out of the open, we just dumped, and it faded down to, looks like it was about 669, 670. For the first few minutes, it just sold off down to the mid 6s. And so I was feeling really good at this point. I was up almost $1 a share on my initial shares, and that gave me definitely a lot more confidence that this play was going to work out. But I was still looking at that previous close level of 804, and that was where I really wanted to risk off of. And so when we started bouncing here and we pushed back up towards some of that pre-market consolidation, it would have been good to start adding shares here around 750. But like I say, I was still risking $8. We're still 50 cents away from there. And so it's just too far away for me to go ahead and put on the full size that I would have wanted to put on. If we could have pushed up to about 785 or 790, in that case, then I would have gotten my full size, which would have been 1,000 shares on this trade. But since this one wasn't able to make it that high, and I wasn't ready to go ahead and put on full size and risk a lower level yet, I was not able to get a full size on this trade. So we topped out here just below 750, I think about 746 it looks like. We pulled back almost down to 7, pulled back to about 710, and then we bounced from there a little bit, and on that little bounce, that's where I went ahead and I added 200 shares. And at this point, I still was thinking that maybe this was just spiking up. It was going to pull back, consolidate a little bit, and then go ahead and pop higher and go ahead and try to test that red-green level that I wanted to risk off of. So I added 200 more shares here at 720. And so this gave me an average entry price of 743 on 500 shares. So my average price was right about here, near the top of where that spike topped out during this first morning push. And so at this point, once this second pop failed here, right after I put on what ended up being my last ad, I decided that I would risk this high of day so far for the regular trading hours high. That way, I still wanted to add 500 more shares. Fortunately or unfortunately, the stock just fell apart and I did not get a chance to add. I thought that maybe $7 might hold and I'd get like one more bounce and then I could put on a few more shares there. But that didn't happen. It's just pulled back all the way back towards that 670 low that it had set right out of the open. It bounced from there just a little bit up to about 690, and then it ended up flushing right down to about 630. And so I went ahead and I covered some shares here. So on this first pull here, I covered 100 shares, and then it popped up from there. And then the way that it popped and then it set a higher low here, I got a little bit scared out on this trade. I thought maybe that low where I had just made that first cover, that might end up being the morning low. In this one, I didn't really want to hold on to this trade all day looking for an afternoon fade. This was a little bit different than my ideal overextended gap down setup in that the green run that it had all occurred on a single day. I'd much prefer to see like maybe 3 big green days, and then I can be more patient holding for more downside. But in this case, where it was only had its first green day and then this next day it was gapping down and going red, I don't have as much conviction that these are going to offer a large amount of downside. And so once this set this higher low and then it kept pushing up and set another higher high, I really thought that I had missed my opportunity. And so as soon as it did actually reverse and it sold off back down and actually broke down below those lows, I had already taken off the rest of my shares. I covered another 200 shares here around 641 and another 200 around 635. And so overall on this trade, my average exit price was 637 on those 500 shares, and I ended up making $523 profit. And you can see that it did go ahead and continue down all the way down to about $6. So that was a little bit disappointing there. And oftentimes I'm actually going to catch at least more of this downside because I tend to be more patient with my entire position. But in this case, since I only had half size, I had one at 1,000 shares, but I only got 500 shares. And that combined with just me thinking that this first place that I covered might have been the bottom, that made me just go ahead and get out the rest of my shares right there. And I still made over $1 a share profit. And so that's great. That is a great gain for me. Anytime long or short, if I make $1 per share, I'm really happy about that. And so this one, it didn't do much else the rest of the day. That $6 area was in fact the bottom, and then it ended up bouncing back up towards about the 650 level, and it kind of consolidated between 630 and 655 for the rest of the day. That was the first trade that I took on Thursday. Again, overextended gap down. I mean, these trades just have great risk reward. You know, ideally I like to see these first pushes here get closer to red green, because if it's coming in right up close to the previous close, that way I'm risking very little. I can get bigger size with very tight risk and then with a lot of downside potential. This one, I should have been a little bit more aware that 750 was going to offer more resistance, as 750, I'd mentioned earlier, that was the afternoon support the previous day after it had topped out. It was supporting above 750, and then coming into pre-market, 750 kind of became resistance. So given those factors, could have risked off of 750 on this spike, but I was just being conservative with this trade, and it still worked out great. Alright, and so the next trade I made was on the ticker GNPX. Now this one was a multi-day breakout, and we're taking a look here at the daily chart. And you can see the for the past couple weeks, you know, this made a big move from about the 30-cent level up over $1, and it was consolidating between $1 and $2 for about 2 weeks. And you can see that that $2 level was also close to the 52-week high, which was actually around $2.25. And then if we zoom out just a little bit more, we can see that back here in, it looks like July of last year, there was actually a big gap down from about the $7 level down to like $3.30. I'm not sure what happened with that gap down. I don't know if it was like a failed drug or if they did an offering that day. That was something that I actually did not look into. I was just aware that that gap was there and that this had the potential to fill that gap to the upside on this breakout. And so this day, I had been watching it for the past couple days after it popped back up and was approaching that $2 breakout level again. And that got me interested in it. I wanted to play that $2 breakout. And so let's get into an intraday chart here. And so this is a 1 minute chart of the day that I played this stock. And as you can see, it actually broke out above that $2 level a little bit later in the day. It was almost 11 a.m. Eastern time, which is right around what I consider midday. And it's usually, I'm not going to be taking a trade during midday. But this was one where I really did want to play this breakout. I believe that I had already covered that previous trade that I talked about on Cean. And so I had the ability to put my focus on this trade. I noticed it in one of the chat rooms I'm in. Somebody had mentioned that this had broken out over $2. Pulled up the chart and I started watching it. Let's zoom in just a little bit here. And you can see the previous day, let me put on some studies here. Okay, and so you can see now with these studies turned on, that this stock had actually opened red and it tested it early in the day. It pulled back and it was consolidating. Then it got above VWAP. That's what this dotted line here, that's VWAP. And this red line here is the previous close. So it got above VWAP and then it was able to make that red to green move and go green and start pushing. Pushed up and it went right through that breakout level and made it up to about 215 before pulling back a little bit. So I was watching it during this consolidation and I wasn't quite convinced that this breakout was going to hold, and I'll show you why. So we topped out here at like 214, 215. We pulled back and we set a low here at 205. Now it pops back up here to about 212. So now we've got a lower high. And then from there it pulls back to about 203. So now we've also got a lower low. And then actually goes down a little bit further to about 202. And then it, before pushing back up towards the high so far of the day. But it stops at 212, which was that previous high still. And then it pulls back even farther down to 201. And so that whole action there with the lower highs and the lower lows, that had me not too convinced that this was going to continue higher, but I kept watching it. So we started consolidating in a tighter range here between 206 and 208 for a few minutes. And then right here, this is where I entered at 211. I bought 1,500 shares at 211. And what happened was I saw a surge. You can see it here, a little bit of extra volume. Like before this happened, the volume had been decreasing. And then all of a sudden we got a little inrush of volume. So watching the tape, I saw the velocity of the tape increase. I saw more buyers coming in and buying the ask. And so as that happened, I went ahead and I bought 1,500 shares at 211. And I will zoom back out here a little bit. And so my entry is right there. And so we keep pushing up almost to 220. And then it pulls back a little bit to about 210. And I'm still feeling okay because now this resistance here during this consolidation should become support, and that was the case. And it supported well, and then we popped up really quick towards 250. And I expected 250 to be a natural psychological resistance level just because of it's a whole dollar, half dollar level. And so I actually had an order in and I was ready to sell before we even got there. Like as we started pushing into the 240s, I put in an order to sell 1/3 of my position or 500 shares here at like 249. And so I got that executed. It pushed right through my order, went all the way up to about 257, 258 before pulling back down into the 230s. And from there, we pulled back and we started consolidating for most of midday. And so at this point, I had locked in a decent profit on 1/3 of my position. And at this point, I wanted to move my risk up the rest of the shares. I didn't want to have locked in some profits on those initial shares, but then go ahead and like keep my original risk and take a loss on the rest of my shares. And so what I did was I moved my risk up to about this level here where this low had held right before this push up to 250. And I was risking about that $2.10 level. And as you can see, we never pulled back down there. We actually stayed above VWAP for all of midday and early afternoon. And so even though this price action didn't look terribly bullish, it was definitely consolidating well. It was consolidating above VWAP, and it was consolidating on decreasing volume, which is generally an indication that the stock is going to go higher after that consolidation. And so you can see here in the early afternoon, I think this is around 2 p.m. here, 1:45, we got this push back up towards the highs. We hit 250, but then it pulled back really hard right back down to about 225. That wasn't a great sign for me, but I did expect us to hit some resistance as we were getting towards those highs, and it was still kind of early in the day at this point. But from there, as you can see, we start slowly grinding up, and we're setting higher lows after that point. So we're grinding up, and we actually grind right back up towards the high of day of 257. So we break out over that previous high that we just pulled back on. But we basically put in like a perfect double top at this point, and we get another hard pullback. And now at this point, I'm getting a little bit more concerned. At this time, by now it's 3 p.m. So now it's power hour, and we just got a fairly bearish candle here on this big drop from about 250 back to about 235. And so when we bounce there, we start struggling, and this price action is kind of rounding over, and it looks like it might just be getting a little bounce and then before heading lower. I went ahead and I took off about 200 shares at around 241 to just try to lock in a little bit more profits. And so I locked in a little bit of profit there, and it was right before another big volume surge came in, and we actually pushed right through the previous highs there and made some new high of days. And now at that point, I kind of want to see the previous high of day, which was resistance. I want to see that become support. And that was the case here. It wasn't a real clean support. It dropped down below there by a few pennies, but it was supporting there, and it was consolidating sideways. And so we get a couple pushes up here right to about 269, and it doesn't quite hold it. After it pulls back again and it's retesting that about 270 level for the third time, I went ahead and I took off a few more shares. I don't remember if I took off 100 or 200 shares right here. And then when we pushed through 270 into new highs again, I did sell another 200 shares there at 272. But then we pulled right back to about the 260s, and I was really hoping that this was just going to push right to about $3 during regular hours, and it didn't. And so I wasn't too sure about what the after hours price action was going to look like. And so as we start pushing back up towards the highs again right before the close of the regular trading hours, I took off a couple more shares. I think I took off another 100 shares here at that same 272 level. But then going into after hours, which is the gray background here, you can see that we did push up to about 290, pull back, and then we get a quick push up through $3. And at this point, once we had started pushing upwards in after hours, I decided that I just wanted to sell if we got that $3 test. I only had about 300 shares left at this point, and I put in an order sometime early in after hours. I put in the order to sell the rest of my position at 297, and I got it filled there as we pushed up through 3. And then you can see this one actually pulled back from that initial test of 3. We pulled back to about that 275 level, but then from there that was the bottom for the rest of after hours, and we actually pushed up all the way to about 325 for the rest of that day. And so on this trade, I ended up profiting $793 on 1,500 shares. And unfortunately, I missed out on this massive $2 share gain the next day. I had originally been thinking that I wanted to swing maybe 500 shares overnight. So I had initially bought 1,500 shares. I sold 500 shares on this first push towards 250. My initial plan was going to be to take off another 500 shares as we got towards $3, and then to swing 500 shares the next day. But by this point in after hours, I just wanted to go ahead and get flat on all of my accounts and just have no overnight risk and be ready to start fresh the next day. And so that was the trade on GNPX. That was a listed multi-day breakout. And the third trade that I want to talk about today is this trade on the ticker UOMO. And this was an OTC pump and dump. And I saw it somewhere after this big day where it actually had spiked up and then pulled back down fairly hard from about $1.85 down to $1. But the promoter saved it and they kept pumping it. And so by the time I entered it on this day here, and I got in, I shorted just 1,000 shares at about 164, just under $1.64. And at this point, I was thinking that since they just saved it from this big dump here, I thought that maybe, there was still a lot more upside potential. And I was thinking this could possibly get up to $2.50 or even $3. And so I was keeping my size small so that if this did keep pushing, I was going to be able to add to my position. So I think that the day after I got into this trade, it had another quick panic here in the morning down to about 130, but they saved it again and it pushed right back up towards the highs. One other thing that I wanted to mention on this stock was that before I even got into the stock, OTC Markets had already put the skull and crossbones on the stock, the caveat emptor, buyer beware, and it also had said that this was a known promotion. So this was an official, legitimate promoted stock, which just gives me that much more conviction that it's gonna dump the way that it did dump. So this one, unfortunately, I only got that initial 1,000 shares. This is a 5-day 1-minute chart, and so this was on the Wednesday before the dump happened. Sorry, I think this was actually Tuesday. This one, it pushed up towards 194 in the morning, and at this point when it did that, I was actually considering adding right there, but then I thought better of it because it had already put in some highs near the same level. I figured that if it broke out to new highs and got a multi-day breakout on the daily chart, that we might see 250 fairly quickly. And so I had almost added some more shares on this day, and then I decided I would actually rather wait till closer to 250 to add some shares, and that never happened. So on Wednesday, you can see this panicked, and it had opened the day at about 180, 182, and it was not doing much for most of the morning, and then people started selling it, and it just panicked all the way down to 60 cents from $1.80. That's just crazy. That's like a 66% drop right there. But I wasn't ready to cover yet, especially because of my smaller size, and I knew that this had the potential to get down into about the 20-cent range based on where it had been consolidating prior to this promotion. And so this one, I did think that maybe once it bottomed here at like 59 cents, I thought maybe it was going to bounce back up towards $1 or higher, and then I could go ahead and add a few more shares there and then try to cover everything down below that like 30-cent level that I was looking for. Unfortunately, this wasn't able to bounce that much. It got up to about 90 cents and pulled back down to 55 cents from there. And then we closed the day, I think it was around 54 cents that we closed on this first day. It looks like it closed right around 50 cents. And so at this point, I was expecting that perhaps the next day it's going to bounce, because a lot of times that's what these OTC pump and dumps do. They'll have their big dump day, the first big dump day, but then a lot of times they're going to bounce maybe the next day or the next 2 days and then have another big dump. But that was not the case here. This one, just right out of the gate on Thursday, we went from about 54 cents right down to as low as 16 cents. And so I'd actually tried to cover right here. I had an order in before this candle here. I had an order in to cover my position around 17.5 for just 1,000 shares. But at this point, the price had gotten so low that market makers were only showing orders of 2,500 or bigger on the level 2. And so I think because of that, because my order wasn't visible, there was only one order that went off below my price, but it was on a different exchange than where my order was sitting. So I unfortunately didn't get filled right there. But I was willing to be patient because at this point now we're about 90% off of the highs of where the stock just was like 2 days previous. And so I was going to be patient and just wait and try to get my fill. And this pretty much just consolidated sideways for the rest of the day. This was a very illiquid stock. We bounced back up to about 25 cents. And I think the spread, a lot of times, the midday and afternoon, the spread was like 20-cent bid, 25-cent ask, or about like 22-cent bid, 25-cent ask. But so I was just being patient. I thought maybe I was going to have to hold this for one more day. But then towards the end of the day, we pulled back down towards that like 17-cent level, the sub 20-cent level that was a really ideal place for me to cover. And so again, I put in an order here around 18 or 18 and a half cents, waiting to get filled. And I was super patient with it. I waited till like the last minute of the day to actually go ahead and say, nope, I'm not going to get filled here. I canceled my bid. And at this point, the offer was at 20 cents. And I just went ahead and I covered my 1,000 shares into the offer there. And I made $1,400 on this trade. I think like $1,455 or so. And so that was it. Between those 3 trades, I ended up profiting $2,755. So that was my 3 trades from last Thursday, and that was my biggest day so far this year. And I think that was actually my biggest day in about the past 6 months. So I'm super happy with those results, and I really like the variety of setups that I got to trade that day. If you like this video, please smash that like button, subscribe if you aren't already, and I'll catch you guys next time.